Among the Lilies. Once upon a time, after the Civil War, a young Amish woman, Rachel, helped on the family farm in Iowa and dreamed about marrying Ben, an intriguing Englisher who, as the story goes, saved her life when she was born in a covered wagon on the prairie. Her heart sang when he dropped by the farm periodically during her youth and regaled her with stories of faraway places.
Ben the Mysterious
shared nothing about being adopted by Chippewa Indians in his youth, or that he had been imprisoned for killing a missionary pastor, or that he'd been severely wounded in the Civil War, or how he came to have wealth and social position in Boston.
Rachel did know that Ben married another while she was busy growing up. Even so, she couldn't help praying he would someday come and carry her off to experience those faraway places. But when she turned 18, she realistically said yes to the marriage proposal of an Amish man, Noah.
Miracle of miracles?
Ben, recently widowed, arrived at the farm in the nick of time and asked for her hand in marriage. Even though Rachel would be banned from returning to the Amish community for marrying an unbaptized outsider, she chose Ben, of course, and he whisked her away to live happily ever after.
But alas and alack,
no sooner had they run away to the big city when they both realized her quiet Amish upbringing was no match for his world of guns and violence. But there was no turning back. The wedding night was a disaster, and Ben sought solace in a nearby saloon.
Lo and behold,
He encountered his long-lost half-brother Jacob, a bit of a ne'er-do-well, but his only blood relative nonetheless. But before Ben could fully repair the breach with Rachel the next day, or introduce her to his brother, he was shot in the back by an unknown assailant.
shock and despair.
Rachel was suddenly alone in the hands of strangers, her husband comatose and possibly paralyzed.
Then along came Jacob, the wicked brother-in-law, up to his eyeballs in debt, whose self-appointed mission was to remove Rachel from Ben's life.
At the end of her rope,
God planted Rachel in the company of a wise former slave, Hannah, who assisted in Ben's surgery and served as nurse and housekeeper. Hannah dispensed comfort as only one who had suffered greatly can do for another.
more's the pity.
Ben awakened from the coma, but his legs were indeed paralyzed. Discouraged and depressed, Ben pushed Rachel away and demanded an annulment.
Grasping at straws, Rachel negotiated a 3-month reprieve with Ben so she could at least visit his farm in Missouri. Hannah ministered hope and strength to Rachel.
On borrowed time.
And so it was that a steamboat bore the remote, melancholy Ben, a surly Jacob, and a forlorn Rachel down the Missouri River to Ben's farm across from Fort Leavenworth.
Upon their arrival at the cabin, Rachel watched in confusion as an Indian woman appeared, and silently, with great affection, greeted Ben. Their hands flew in the excluding silence of Indian Sign Language.
Jacob smugly delighted in Rachel's isolation. Rachel focused her attention on Joseph, Emma's son, the only one who would or could communicate with her. After several weeks of cold and remote treatment, Ben angrily demanded an annulment and sent the gloating Jacob to town with a humiliated Rachel in tow.
Reprieve.
Ben's lawyer was out of town for a spell. The sulking Jacob went to the saloon to take care of business, so Rachel bought the supplies. Jacob, drunk and caustic, was still taking care of business when darkness fell. He sent Rachel home alone.
Disastrous decision.
Confused as to direction, she stopped the wagon in the woods under the full moon, where suddenly and viciously she was put upon by 2 escaped prisoners.
Defiled, shamed, and rejected, Rachel went to the river the next day to put an end to her life.
Wonder of wonders?
An old man appeared with a flop-eared bunny as she was about to do the deed, and inquired if Rachel could look after it for him. Dazed, she agreed.
On the way back to the cabin, Rachel encountered Emma, who instinctively understood what had happened. She silently administered her healing remedies.
Hope cometh.
Soon, Rachel became acquainted with Annabelle, a widowed professor and friend of Ben's who lived nearby. She compared women to the biblical parable of the lilies of the field, who stand in prayer, trusting God to meet all their needs. From her intriguing trunk, she drew the symbol of her own husband's Jewish heritage and shared their importance in her own faith. Before she was called back to Boston, Annabelle delighted Rachel with a German Bible of her own.
Thusly fortified, Rachel made the best of a long winter, and even rescued the drunken Jacob from freezing to death in a snowstorm. It did wonders for his attitude and behavior.
Surprise of surprises?
When spring came, Jacob abandoned his business attire, dressed in Levi's, and actually helped Rachel plant her garden and tobacco crops. Ben, suspicious they were having an affair, watched like a hawk, rifle by his side. And so it was that the brothers discovered on the same day that Rachel was carrying a baby.
Oh, dread.
Thus began a series of unfortunate circumstances surrounding the birth of Rachel's son. Annabelle succumbed to heart disease, and her voice of reason was now silent. Ben shattered his relationship with Jacob and ended the marriage. As Rachel departed the cabin for an uncertain future,
Horror and irony?
her evil assailant, a crusty old French Indian trapper and a vile adversary of Ben's from his youth in Minnesota, materialized on the farm intent on claiming his son. Despite his physical limitations, Ben threw himself into the fray and suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of his nemesis. In the ensuing havoc of the abduction, Emma dies while stabbing the trapper to death.
Bittersweet.
In the midst of the grief, Ben's mysterious and painful past slowly began to unravel, making a way for God to heal.
Rachel gave God all the glory.
And they lived reasonably happy ever after.
The end.
This project is dedicated to my friend and mentor, Mary Bruno, whose decades of scriptural research on God's unique assignment for women made this story possible.
We had the most extraordinary week. God just opened so many doors. We were out at the Fetcher Ranch, and she had whatever we needed. If we needed a pin, if we needed a prop, she would just go somewhere and get it. And it was so fun. Everyone that Angela cast in the different parts were incredibly wonderful. Even some of them hadn't acted before. Took direction well, and we had a good time. I can't imagine anywhere that I could have gone that had so many locations in such a small amount of area that had absolutely everything we needed. And of course, the scenery is incredible here. The interesting thing is that the movie will take place in Weston, Missouri, which is a very hilly area, so we were able to use things that really will look very authentic. So it was great. I had a fun time doing it, and so glad we did.